Welcome to the Barbell Strategy Podcast,
where we talk about coaching,
training,
and all things strength and conditioning
to help the fitness athlete,
CrossFitter, and the coach. Please share and enjoy.
How are we doing, Sam?
Not too bad, how are you?
All good here, all good here. The sun is shining, so...
It's always helpful, hey? It's not like the old days, training in a dark warehouse with no windows.
Not quite. No,
it's character building, hey?
It is indeed. I remember shoveling a lot of snow one year. Well, the 1 year that I was coaching in the winter at CrossFit Leeds, and had to watch a few John North Attitude Nation videos to get a little bit in the mood for training beforehand, and then
those were the days,
max out.
Someone asked me today at the gym. They said they were asking about that kind of time, and they asked how did I manage to train by myself and push myself. But I was just saying at that point, you didn't really have a choice. Do you know what I mean? It's not like gyms weren't open all day like they are now. So if you're training in the morning, you train there by yourself if the classes are finished. And equally, when you're competing, especially when you're competing at a reasonable level, there's not many people who can train with you. So you just have to do it, don't you? You'll do the odd training day with other people who are a similar level, but on the whole, you just have to get used to pushing yourself. And also, I think it's the not knowing. You can do workouts and you think you're doing all right, but you don't really know till you get to a comp or you do the open.
Yeah, there's a learning curve.
Yeah.
Or there's just this recalibration that people have to go through when they do qualifiers and when the results come in and when the leaderboard shows. And quite often, if people don't know how to handle that, it can be a little bit disappointing.
Yeah, because there wasn't that many comps back then either. So it's not like now you could do a comp every month if you wanted to, and you've got a good handle on where you're at. Whereas then we probably would only compete 2-3 times a year. Yeah,
something like that. I think it was. I do remember doing the qualifiers. I mean, not even that when we were starting out. I remember doing the qualifiers for the London Throwdown. Then I got injured, and then there would be the competition that Central Manchester put on in the summer, and then Divided We Fall in the autumn, and that was sort of the calendar, as it were. I do remember as well. 1 year. Well, for a couple of years, I only did, probably to my downfall, I only did a few competitions, and that was around the time that I went to regionals, and then I went to some other competitions, and I think the going to regionals made me think, all right, I'm at this standard and that, and then I went to a few comps, and I was like, oh shit, that's definitely not the case. But
it's quite comp specific, isn't it?
Yeah, you've also just got to be careful not to overdo it as well, because you can just get burnt out by qualifiers and everything like that.
I think especially as you get more experience, you can get away with doing less.
Mm-hmm.
I think at the beginning, for beginners, it's good to get the competition experience, to know where they're at, but also competing's a skill. And if you've not done a lot of competitive sport, then getting used to, especially individual competitive sport, then getting used to that competition day and the mindset and the managing your emotions through the day and your energy through the day and getting your recovery right, all that kind of stuff. You've got to learn, haven't you? It's all right, someone telling you, but I think until you've experienced the importance of all of that stuff, it could be a bit of a challenge.
And I think it goes full circle as well, because when you start out, you can get away with doing a lot of competitions and just learning through that process. Then when you start to really go through you sort of the middle, the intermediate phase where you're really trying to develop stuff, you sort of have to hold back a little bit, and then when you become 100%. More advanced, you can just get back into it. And if you look at elite athletes, a lot of them compete a lot, and it's just because they need that constant feedback loop to be able to direct their training. So it can be a tough one to navigate.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's changed.
But what we're going to do is we're going to flip the script a little bit, and rather than talk about competition, we are going to talk about the very beginning and how we start off working with our athletes. What are some of the processes that we go through? So, yeah, this pod and the topic of this pod is going to be focused mainly on just getting athletes started and what that process looks like. And yeah, we'll sort of see where it goes. And then we have a few questions at the end. So, Sam, how are people mainly getting in touch with you? What's the process? Are you getting, DMs? Are they actually trying to do Instagram calls? I've had that a couple of times where they try to call you on Instagram. I'm like, who are you?
I don't think I've had that. I think I've had the odd WhatsApp call, just random WhatsApp call. Never had it on Instagram.
Fair enough.
But I think it's changed as I've changed and I've moved around. Because I think at the moment, obviously I'm exclusively working online. So obviously then people reach you in a different way compared to what I've always found when I've worked in a gym specifically, then you always start to pick up a few people from the gym you're working in.
Yeah.
And then I think that tends to spread to the area.
That's a lot easier of a process when you have them in the gym already.
100%. In all the ways, I think, because even once you've started coaching them, you see more. Just like off the cuff, you might just spot them doing something that they wouldn't normally tell you about or send you a video of, and you spot some of those little things, which makes it easier. I think then obviously from a question answer perspective, again, people tend to communicate more because more things come up when you're having a proper conversation.
Do you mean like if you're coaching someone and they're doing your training and you're at the gym at the same time, and their working sets are around about, I don't know, they're doing some cleaner jerks at, let's call it 80 kilos, and they jump from empty bar to 60 to 80, and then their first few sets are a sack of shit, and you're like, that's why you didn't want...
Yeah, exactly. Whereas if you only ever communicate with them through online methods, then obviously that's the kind of stuff that you don't see, isn't it?
I've definitely had a few scares when I've seen some of my athletes train. Yeah. I've been working with them for say 2 years or so, and then finally see them in for a one, in-person session. Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's definitely different, hey. But no, so I think these days probably the majority come through either through Instagram, through website, or I'd say the majority of mine is still probably referrals,
Mm-hmm.
I'd say that's probably a good 60-70% of it. People who either they know someone who I'm working with currently or know someone who I've worked with in the past, and then they get in touch that way and they've heard of you that way.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's generally where mine come from. How about you?
Yeah, a bit of the same. I think since I've just not been working at a gym for a number of years, and I've been doing in-person coaching, but that's just more for my own joy of in-person coaching, and the type of people that go to those types of classes are definitely not those who would get remote coaching. And then some people have come from the weightlifting courses, the Bogner strength weightlifting courses, which I'm doing on some weekends. But more so now, I would say the process is coming through just Instagram, some DMs. Some of them are referrals. Some of them are referrals, but they're not really referrals in the sense, they know someone who I already coach. They don't necessarily have that conversation, but that's sort of like the link. And I think, the sort of trust that's built already with referrals is very helpful. Usually those individuals are the ones that are sticking around and a little bit easier to start off with because there's some expectations around what it is that you're going to be going through. They have a bit of a reference point for what your process is, just by either speaking to the other people that they know or just by observing their training. But I have had, I think I did have, like some random Instagram call one time. I think I was actually on Instagram at the time because I don't have notifications, and it popped up and I was like, what the fuck is going on?
What's happening?
Yeah, so I declined the call. So when you're going through your initial chat with them, what is that like? Are you doing that via a video call? Are you Are you sort of doing everything written, or what's going on?
Yeah, so generally, if it's like just someone who's just inquired on a random day, someone I've never met before, then I think the first thing, I tend to start off written just to gather a bit of information. So I'll kind of explain to them an outline of how things work, different packages, things like that. See which one they want to do, and then I tend to send them over a questionnaire, which is quite broad, like obviously encompassing all their goals, things like that, training history, things like benchmarks, injuries, training time, equipment, as much information as you can get. And then I also ask for videos of, again, as many videos as they've got, really, especially for the more technical things though. So obviously like your Olympic lifts, some of the more technical gymnastic movements, but obviously that depends where they're at a little bit. If they're quite early on, then there's going to be, there always tends to be those kind of things around the Olympic lifts. Gymnastics wise, it can vary quite a bit, because if they've not got things like muscle ups, then obviously they're not going to have that kind of thing. And I like to do that first before I speak to them, because I think initially when you start working with someone, especially if they've not done online coaching before, they don't necessarily know what you want to know.
Yeah.
But getting some information from them then helps you also understand, obviously a little bit about where they're at. So when you do speak to them, you're going into that conversation with a plan, as opposed to just going opening it up completely. But then also as well, you can kind of, if they go through the questionnaire and perhaps the information is a little bit limited, then as you're going through that call with them, I think you can kind of set an expectation around the kind of level of information that you want, both in the initial stages, but then obviously as you're working through the program as well.
Yeah.
Because I think that's the thing that a lot of people, it varies a lot, but obviously, you get the people who are very good at sharing information about their training sessions, and then you get the others who you kind of, especially at the start, you've got to ask a lot of questions to extract the information you want, and then it becomes more of a habit for them. But I always find from the questionnaire you can get a bit of a guide as to which type of person it's going to be. So then it means then when you are on that call, then you can really dig into things, because you already understand a little bit about them, so you know where to direct the conversation. And you can kind of set a standard as to the level of communication and the things that you want to know. So I like to start written.
I am far less organised than you. I just jump in to the call straight away. So I try to get a call going as soon as I can, and I think sometimes that just I can understand from your perspective where you're asking them to give you certain information and get a bit of a picture and that type of thing, that you are creating some expectations around communication and that type of stuff, which is great. Sometimes I sort of use the call just to gauge how organised the person is as well. I'm just like, okay, let's have a call. I try to do it as soon as I can, and I'll give them a few windows of time where I'm available over the next couple of days. Part of that as well is that I want to take advantage of their motivation, because usually at that point of them sending a message, I want to take advantage of it. And then I think I do the info, the gathering, the data and all that type of stuff afterwards. And for that initial call, I try to sort of talk about, okay, what it is that they're on the call for, what's worked in the past, what's not worked in the past. And usually with those questions, you can pick up their biases. So if someone has gone through, a general CrossFit program, they've been doing classes for a couple of years, they move on to some people just move straight into a competitor's program for a year or so. Some people try to do it a bit themselves, where they may start to include some extras and then do classes on top of it. And you can usually see where the person is and the type of training that they enjoy, and also just the type of training which they just have no exposure to, because sometimes that can be really good in the initial phases of their training, is just exposing them to new stimulus, quick wins. That type of stuff can usually generate good results in the beginning. I get them to talk about the ideal outcome. What is it that you're looking for? What is the end goal? What does that look like in the next competition? What does it look like in a year's time, 2 years' time, etc.? and then we chat a little bit about the timeline. What are your expectations around that? Because I think that can be sometimes an interesting one. I think now people are a lot more realistic with what you can do, and I think it's just more because, you know, if you see someone who's competing who's doing really well, you see the amount of work that they have to put in. Whereas I think back in the day, you'd maybe have some people in your circle who were really good, or they competed at a good level, and then maybe you can match them on one or two things. And because you did that, it sort of skewed your thinking around how good you were and how long things would take for you. And, you know, I remember, you know, guys, I was coaching in Q8, it would be, they would just do classes, and they would turn up after, like, I don't know, a month of doing classes, and they'd be like, I want to go to regionals. I'm like, what? You see me and all the other coaches, we are literally smashing ourselves every day to do that goal, and you're just coming in for your 7 p.m. class. So I think the timeline thing is important, because then you can set expectations, and you can just make sure you're starting things off on the right foot. And then it would be after that, just collecting details. I usually try to avoid chatting about logistical stuff in the call as well, because I don't know, I think that type of thing can just be easily written. You know, how many times a week do you want to train? What's your access to equipment and that type of thing. So that is something I go through afterwards, and then I will usually take in some information around their stats. You know, just seeing where the numbers are at, seeing what type of time trials that they do, because everyone knows all their strength numbers. And it's funny because you'll have some people and they'll be like, my 1 RM, 2 RM, 3 RM, 5 RM for all of these lifts, and then they'll say my 2 RM after a 10-minute AMRAP was this for this lift, and I'm like, that's interesting. And then you say, hey, so, or you know, the question might be, do you have any time trials? What's your 500-meter row, or what's your 1 mile run? And they usually have like 2 time trials for their endurance work. Yeah. And very rarely are there running time trials as well.
Definitely. Especially the longer stuff. You ask someone their 5K. Yeah. Then they're unlikely to know it, hey?
I do remember at some stage, I think when I used to do testing, part of my testing battery was a 60-minute row.
60 minutes?
60 minutes. For some,
and you want to keep these people as clients after the test week?
I mean, I think I was just pulling it from the OPEX assessment thing. Yeah. I changed that into a 30-minute test after. But I do remember actually coaching someone, and this must have been like 8 years ago, and he was doing his 60-minute row. It might have been his actually 30-minute row, but I remember him going through his rowing, and at some stages he just started closing his eyes, and he just started like going through the row, just not even paying attention to anything. He was not into his aerobic stuff at all. But getting a little bit off track there, that can be quite interesting, just sort of seeing the numbers that they got and seeing that type of information, and you will usually see what people like to do in their training. And then, you know, all the usual injuries, what type of stuff you got going on there? Do you have anything going on in, you know, your life which is going to affect your training at all? Do you have to pick your kids up every single day or something like that? Try to get a little bit of information about things they like to do outside of CrossFit as well. And usually that's an interesting one, just sort of seeing some of those, what those hobbies are. And then one thing that I find interesting as well is just asking them what their ideal workout is and then what their worst workout is, because that usually just tells you a lot of things. And the longer you coach, the more you start to see these patterns emerge from, you know, the people that you work with. And we're all individual snowflakes and all that type of stuff, but you know, we all do. There are certain biases that people have, and it's very apparent when you ask them what their favorite workout is or what their best workout is versus their worst.
Yeah, definitely. How do you approach it if there's just a complete misalignment between the training that they tell you that they want to do or the training that they've been doing versus where they also say that they want to get to? Like say they just want to do Olympic lifting all the time, but they also know that gymnastics is a huge weakness, but they also don't really want to do it.
Yeah, I suppose two things really. I'm probably quite frank with them now. It happens less now. I think people are a little bit more aware of stuff. There's so much more information out there about training. You know, rarely are you going to find the weightlifter who just wants to do a bit of cardio and then all of a sudden is like, I want to go to regionals. Like that type of thing doesn't exist anymore. People are they know what the sport needs. But usually it would be a case of, okay, well, this is where you're at with this workout, and I have a couple of other athletes who are of a similar level, and this is where they're at. Or it could be, using information like qualifier workouts, open workouts, etc., to prove a point and just lay it out and say, here it is, black and white. You can either carry on just doing what you want, and this is likely going to be the results, or we can change that and we can bias your training. Usually it is more in favour of gymnastics or aerobic work or something along those lines. But yeah, I try to be a bit more frank with it now, and but at the same time, I am fully aware that some people just like to train a certain way, and I say to some people like, hey, it's okay if you prefer just training this way. You just probably have the wrong goals, so we can pivot the goals. And I think that I'm a lot more for that now, because I think the landscape of what you can do in this type of sport, activities, etc., is a lot wider. So you can pick and choose what you want to do. You can lift and live like a weightlifter, but not compete. There's a lifestyle component to it. You don't necessarily need to have these competitive goals or these very tangible things there. It just takes a little bit of a different way of motivating those people.
Mm. Yeah, no, I agree. I think it does happen less, but I think you still come across it where there is that disconnect. And I think as well, you've got to find that balance. There's a little bit of give and take, isn't there? Because you can know that this is what this person really needs to be doing.
Yeah.
But if you know that you could program that, but they're just not going to do it, then that's not helping anybody, because they either do something completely random on that day and miss out on any kind of real training stimulus, or even if they do what you want them to do, but it's very half-hearted, it's like, well, they're not getting the best out of that. So it's finding that balance, isn't it, between, and I think that's especially working with people one-on-one, that's the skill of like a coach in a way. It's finding that balance between doing the things that they need to do in a way that they also can either ideally enjoy, but if not tolerate. Mm-hmm. And I think in those initial stages of working with someone, there's a lot of figuring out that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think the first initial stage is really important, because you want to make sure that the individual is enjoying the training, they're engaged with the process, and they're getting something out of it, which is a little bit more than just good training sessions. Mm-hmm. Because there is going to be a stage when just good training sessions isn't going to be enough, and if you think back to when we were competing, and I remember I would just do anything because it was about the goal. I was locked on, and I didn't care what I did in training. I didn't ask questions or anything like that. I would complete everything, and if I didn't complete everything, I would make sure it was done. And sometimes, you may notice that someone just misses a certain conditioning piece every single week, or they will just be sporadic with the things that they choose, or it will be, I just jumped into class because I felt like it, or something along those lines. Yeah. And I think that what you are trying to do in the initial stages of working with someone is also start to feel those things, like feel it out a little bit, and just sort of see where some of these things might start to come up, so you can have a bit of foresight into where there may be a bit of friction. But what would be like the first couple of weeks of training? What would that look like for someone starting with you, Sam?
Yeah, it depends. I think, again, it kind of depends on where they've come from,
Yeah.
how well I know them, and then also how well they know themselves. Because I think some people, especially if they've come from classes, the information that you can get around, like, say, benchmarks can be a little bit limited. So if it's someone who I don't know, never met, never worked with before, and they don't have a lot of information to go off, then I do like to start with some form of testing. Just because I think it helps in two ways. I think it helps me fill in some of the blanks with getting a good idea of where they're at, but I also think it helps them understand where they're at too in relation to the goals that they want to achieve. So in some instances I will start off with that. In other instances, and I think this is more if people have like recently done a test week, or if they've come off the back of a competition, or if they are quite knowledgeable about where they're at, then you can kind of get straight into a more typical kind of training cycle, but still with certain things in there that help me gather more information. So it's looking at maybe getting into a normal kind of strength session, but with different complexes to assess kind of different things through the week, to assess which parts of this movement are they struggling with, where are they at technically, and how might we then look to change it. That first week in particular, from a conditioning perspective, I'll try and put in workouts that are quite specific but variable through the week. So I might have one workout that's very much a barbell workout, and I might have another one that's a longer aerobic, your wall balls, burpees, rowing, things like that. And I'll have a couple of different workouts like that, and then some combinations, like different loads, things like that, just to get a really good picture of where this person's at from as broad of a perspective as possible. Because again, obviously that first week, but I think anywhere up to the first month, it really is a lot of information gathering and trying to find out exactly where they're at and test them across quite a broad range of things if the goal is to compete in something like CrossFit, where ultimately they're all the things that are going to come up through a season or through a comp weekend.
Yeah, it's a tough one because there's just so many different ways of doing it, and I think you can't be totally wrong in whatever way you go about it. But there is, I think, practicality issues of doing a test week, of the validity of those tests, and also you are, like we mentioned before, you're trying to manage a coaching relationship in the early stages, so you don't want to be doing a lot of stuff that they will not enjoy or they're going to suck at, and then all of a sudden that's what they think training's about. My process has evolved. I've always played around with testing weeks, and I've always used it as more as like a thought experiment. I've enjoyed the idea of writing the most balanced template or the most balanced testing week, and just trying to almost codify in a way the demands of CrossFit and what the best training methods are for CrossFit, and what are the tests which give you the clearest picture. But the thing I have tried to embrace now is just a bit more of the chaos of it all. So I will test on certain things, but I came across this idea called a MVP from Mladen Janovic. He wrote it in a book called The Strength Training Manual, which I recommend to any coach out there. And it comes from this idea of a minimal viable product, which they use in the tech industry, which is sort of like, okay, what's the easiest thing that we can get out there that's functioning, that just gives us information and something that we can iterate and develop and progress over time. So, it looked like a very general, broad template. You're going to do some Olympic weightlifting, going to go into some strength work, maybe some skills, and then some strength, a conditioning piece. And with that, I tried to, at least over the course of about 2 weeks, try to get a nice broad picture of different things. But there are certain things which will just paint a bit of a picture, and you'll be able to see where the transfer is in certain things. You'll be able to pick up on certain archetypes, the typical people who prefer more squatty, pressy type movements versus those people who prefer more hingy and pulling type movements. And you can start to pick up on these things through just a couple of strength pieces. And I think one of the things I really enjoy about using this, so just to give you more of an app, like a complete example, it could be, all right, we're going to do back squat, pause back squats, 3 sets of 5, moderate to tough weight, pause for 1 second, 2 seconds, and every round I want it to feel like you got 2 to 3 reps in reserve. And then you just start to pick up on all of these things. Do they pause for long enough? What are their weight selections like? And you can start to see how they train, and you can see what their process is. Because I think that is probably the easiest thing to make big, significant impacts in someone's training and someone's processes by improving their training and improving how they go about the sort of smaller decisions that they make in their training.
Yeah.
And then within the conditioning, it can be a little bit harder to sort of pick the types of things because the movement selections and everything like that is a little bit more difficult. You know, if you said to someone, hey, give me a 1 rep max clean, you're going to get a real good idea of their absolute strength. You're going to get a good idea of how they move in their weightlifting, their skill. You're going to get a good idea of their speed strength and those types of things. But with conditioning, you might have a high turnover workout where you're doing low rep schemes, but you're just bouncing between movements for, every 30 to 40 seconds. But that might look completely different with, a triplet of 3 different other movements. So I try to get some more, I like to characterize workouts more towards, you got your higher turnover, you got your sort of grindy workouts, so slow movements, high tension, heavy conditioning type pieces. You've got your battery stuff, so heavier barbell work, more skill and complex gymnastics work. You've got your bottleneck gymnastics, so it could be stuff that they have capacity with, but you're pushing them to the point where they really slow down. And then you have your workouts which are more monostructural in nature as well. So I tend to try to get about 2 weeks worth of programming laid out, and I may make some adjustments along the way as well based on results. So it might be I'm looking at their training 3 days in and I'm thinking, all right, this is really not where we expected it to be, so let's change it up a little bit. Or it could be something like, oh, your pacing just seems way off on this workout, so let's just do some assault bike intervals and work on your actual pacing skills. And those little changes and that type of stuff I would generally be paying a bit more attention to and making those changes in the first couple of weeks. And then after that, I would say after a couple of weeks of a little bit of tinkering and playing around with some stuff, it's fairly static, and I try to keep it that way so they can just develop some good training volume. Obviously, this depends on where they are as well. Most of the time, people are going to start with you after a competition or going into some more development phase of their training, not some more performance phase. So that's the process that I would go through in their initial training. But the idea of MVP and having an idea and just a template which you would be able to deploy to an athlete and just change it up based on their ability and that type of stuff. Having that broad idea, I think it can be really useful. It can be a very good thought experiment for coaches to go through.
Yeah, 100%. I think the other thing, like what you were saying about the conditional workouts as well, you get a good insight into people's mindset with things like that too, because I think you'll see, you see the people, let's just say you give them a workout, almost like a chipper style workout that might have, 50 chest to bar in it, and they might have said to you, I can do 25 chest to bar unbroken, no problem. But then they'll get to the workout with 50 in and they'll do sets of 5s. And it's giving you an insight into, I think, the confidence that they have in their ability to really attack workouts, whereas some people can be very cautious and they deliberately break things a lot. And then I think equally from a barbell perspective, you might see the people where, and this is an extreme example, but let's just say their 1 rep max clean and jerk is 80 kilos, but they'll do DT in 7 minutes. And then you get the people where their max clean jerk is 140 kilos and they'll do DT in 9 minutes.
Yeah.
And obviously that's a big exaggeration, but I think it really does give you an insight into people's mindset, but then something like that as well, for me, that starts to give you clues as to what this person responds to in their training and what they can tolerate. Because, like I say, in that example, you do get the people who are very efficient at high percentages of their max in, say, a barbell cycling workout. So then for me, I've always found that those kind of people, when it comes to their strength work, they don't really tolerate the kind of the high intensity, low volume, it's not that they don't tolerate it, but they don't really respond to like the high intensity, low volume type strength stuff. They're much better on the flip side and vice versa. So I think it's all those kind of things that's in those first few weeks that you're really trying to pick up on, so that when you really do get into it, everything is kind of as geared towards that person as possible within the time frame that you've had to work with them.
Hey everyone, Matt Harvey here. I produced this podcast that you're listening to or watching just now, so if you like the way that it looks and sounds, that's partially down to me. If you've got a podcast, video, or other online project that you'd like some production help with, or even if you just want to chat through some ideas, drop me a DM or an email. My details can be found in the show notes below. Thanks so much for your time. On with the show.
We're going to go into some questions now. So I think I'm going to start off with the question that I got asked this week, which is around mental blocks. So mental blocks in your weightlifting with certain numbers on certain lifts. And, there's a few different situations that this could occur in. But one of the things I would try to do with an individual who is having some mental block with their weightlifting is try to develop their capacity at a submaximal effort and try to develop their skill as much as possible to develop their confidence. So if someone is constantly going to a weight and they are missing that weight, and then it just becomes a thing in their head, and maybe they just have a real shitty 2 weeks going into that session, my suggestion would be to bring it back down to a position where they are capable, they are confident, and then try to build from that, but not only just by doing the same things, but doing different things. Okay, so, we can be working from a hang position, we can be working from blocks, we can be performing a no feet variation, we can, try to work a high hang variation. Like if you can get someone who is confident in a high hang snatch or a high hang clean, I would probably go mid thigh clean. High hang clean is a bit awkward of a movement. But if you get someone who is more confident in those situations, in getting underneath the barbell, where they really are at a disadvantage, they're not able to accelerate, they're not able to generate a lot of force. In that situation, you are going to overcome those barriers around people not necessarily having the confidence to get underneath the barbell. Or if someone is really struggling with that pull or keeping their positions off the floor, and then they clerk the bar, which is basically when they, how do you describe it? Like when people, like in weightlifting, they call it clerking the bar, which I think is named after a weightlifter. I feel sorry for that guy. But it's basically where you pull the bar and then you just have like zero attempt of getting underneath it.
Yeah, just bottle it basically.
Yeah. that situation is going to occur. Sorry for any of you who, if this is happening to you in your weightlifting, we really do apologize. We're not laughing at you. But if that situation is happening, then you've just got to build a hell of a lot of confidence coming off of the floor, because usually it's when you're coming off of the floor and the bar starts to feel really heavy. In those situations, that's going to be the thing which will sort of talk you out of the lift. So I think developing your capacity and trying to bring up the bottom rather than try and bring up the top. So it's sort of like 100%. This idea of pulling the floor higher rather than trying to push the ceiling. And I think that if you're able to do that, that's going to be the thing which will get you to overcome those barriers. And in CrossFit, I think it's really important to have that outlook of trying to develop those numbers which are like the everyday numbers, because in weightlifting, the weightlifting involved in CrossFit is so much more variable, the situations that you're going to come across. So you have to make sure that you're confident in those weights around 90%, and then eventually you're really confident in those weights around 92%. I think there was Training Think Tank did a bit of a study or something along those lines where they tested the max, compared it to the data on the CrossFit Games website of a post-conditioning max that occurred in the open. I forget what it was. I think it was maybe... Was it that complex that you had to do a deadlift, hang clean into jerk or something along those lines after an open workout? I think it was either that or it was another competition. And I think that the number is around, like, if people are able to hit like 92% of their max post conditioning piece, that's the number that top athletes are around. Okay. So I think if you can start to have that outlook where you're thinking about pushing those bottom numbers up and trying to pull the floor towards you rather than trying to push the ceiling, that's going to be the thing which will help you overcome those situations.
100%. I think it's that consistency in your technique is a big one, because I think you always see it when people say they hit that point where they've reached their mental block. They might not even notice it themselves, but you see these little changes in their technique where things, whether it's them rushing or they're overthinking or they're just thinking about too many things, and things start to fall apart a little bit. And I think the more consistent your technique, the more automatic it is, the less you think about the weight on the bar, and the more you just go through your process.
Yeah.
And I think, a lot of the really good weightlifters, they're so consistent with it, and they tend to have relatively consistent progress relative to their strength numbers alongside it, because their technique doesn't break down, it stays the same. I think that's always quite interesting. I think there's obviously, like you say, post open workout, there's the art of the distraction, where when people are thinking less, they've just done a workout and all of a sudden they hit a PB. Like, how often do you see that? So I think that's definitely a big part of it from a mental perspective. There's
definitely a thing with people doing PBs after an open workout. I think just the occasion and that type of thing, it can also help quite a bit.
Yeah,
but
definitely. I think the other thing is you tend to know quite early on in your session what kind of day it is.
Yeah.
You know if you're having a day when you're feeling good and a day when you're feeling not so good. And I feel like sometimes it's about being smart with that and knowing if I know that I'm not feeling 100% today, I'm not going to try and hit a certain number, because I know that if I try and if I fail, the next time I come to it, I'm going to be in my head a little bit more. So on those days, you choose to stay a little bit lighter, do the things that build your confidence in a slightly different way. Mm-hmm. And then on the days you do feel good, then you can push it. But I think kind of with weightlifting, but you see it a lot when people are trying to get muscle ups, is they get so used to failing that failing becomes the habit, and they're not even expecting to make it by that point.
Yeah, with gymnastics, you've got to try and find, and there's a number of different ways you can do it for, say, muscle ups and that type of stuff, but you can work progressions as much as you want that are sort of broken chunks of the movement, but you have to do the full movement, and I think you need a reference point. So banded muscle ups or assisted or something along those lines. You need to put yourself in the situation of being successful and feeling it, because there is a lot of information in the movement itself. It's not about chopping it all up and putting it back together again. That works when you're a complete beginner and you're a complete novice and you don't know you have no reference point. You can get a bit of progress with that, but after a while you actually need to use the reps, use the information, use the feedback to sort of pick up these little things, and you might not consciously know what it is that you're picking up. And you see this all the time with more skill-based sports, where people who just spend more time doing the sport just have more game knowledge, and you can just see it. And you can, and if you play a skill-based sport, you can just see those people, and they might not, sometimes you see it where they're not the most athletic, but you can just, they've got reps under their belt and they just know where to be. They know how to do something. They know Their decision making is on point, and I think in the world of more closed sports and gym-based sports like CrossFit, you've got to get those reps in. What was the question you had, Sam?
So I had a question around aerobic training, specifically like Zone 2 stuff, and how useful it is for CrossFit athletes. I think it's an interesting one. I think it was definitely a bit of a trend for a while, where everyone just wanted to do Zone 2. My big thing with, if you're going to do it properly, because it's when people say, oh, I'm going to do this Zone 2, but actually they're doing Zone 3, or they're doing Zone 2 and they're doing it for 10 minutes. It's like, well, you're not going to get anything out of that, because I think obviously all the research around Zone 2 stuff from outside of CrossFit, it's done on endurance athletes who are doing hours of it, like per day.
Yeah.
So doing, 10, 20 minutes of it, unless you're looking at it purely from a recovery perspective, that's a little bit different. But if you actually want any kind of training stimulus, then you've got to do it properly. And then my thing is, well, have you got time? And is it the biggest gap? Because if you're working with someone who has an hour and a half to train 5 days a week, and they need to get stronger, they need to develop their skill, then is spending an hour and a half on a row machine twice a week really the best way to use their training time?
Yeah, for sure. It is the accessory work of endurance training. I mean, if you want to get a bigger back squat, are you going to go over and do a bunch of hamstring curls and leg extensions, or are you going to squat? And I think that Zone 2 can be an easy, quick win for people who have like no experience with this type of stuff. I think for CrossFit athletes, the biggest benefit to Zone 2 training is not physiological stuff. It is more of just pacing, and it is just developing your paces and understanding how to go easy, and just understanding that easier gear. If you understand how to do that in CrossFit, you have just increased the spectrum of your paces by a very significant amount. And I think that if you learn how to do that early in your training, and you just get a bit of an idea of, the sort of words or the nomenclature I use, is easy is going to be recovery. That's not even Zone 2 yet. Moderate is going to be that sort of around Zone 2 effort. This is going to be the sort of, the pace of an easier effort, 400 if you're alternating from moderate to hard. You have those harder paces, which we are familiar with in CrossFit, because that's the high intensity stuff. But the best thing people can get from Zone 2 is learning how to pace.
Yeah, 100%. I'm getting used to working for, like where you said, someone doing a 30-minute row and closing their eyes. A lot of CrossFitters aren't used to working for more than 10 minutes.
Yeah. I remember, actually, I think I was still in Leeds, and I was getting coached by, it was the first time I tried to get remote coaching. I did get remote coaching for a few months from Brandon Phillips, who I think was from Outlaw. And he put in like Zone 1, 30 minutes, Zone 1 row. And this was the first time I ever saw this stuff. And I think it was the first time this type of stuff was starting to come about, and it was late 2012. I remember that. And I smashed myself in an AM session one time for 30 minutes on the row. I was like, Zone 1. I was like, I didn't even know what the fuck that meant. I just was like, it took me a couple of weeks.
I remember watching you do some of those sessions. And it was so far out of your comfort zone, because we were like obviously complete opposites. And I'm sure there was one that he gave you, and it was like 10 1K rows with like a minute's rest in between. Like that kind of thing.
But it was supposed to be easy, and I just didn't know it was supposed
to
be
easy.
You
were
were
going for it. And you would I remember watching you do like 5 or 6 of them, and then just absolutely dying. It was entertaining at the time for me. Because for me, that's like perfect dream workout.
Yeah. Yeah, no, funny stuff. Quick follow question was, in a world of sitting down a lot and resting postures, what are your tips for shoulder mobility and shoulder strength? And I think I'm not a big fan of saying there is bad postures. because I don't think that posture has that much of an effect on people's mobility. I think that the one thing I heard that was quite interesting, and I think it sort of sums it up, was the bad posture to have is the posture that doesn't change. And I think that if we are looking to get people to be moving better, we need to move more, and we need to move more differently. And I think that is the easiest thing that people can do. And we see this with people who they may do go WOD or run WOD or whatever it is, and they go from not doing anything to doing something, and then all of a sudden they're like, oh, this works so well. And it does work well. I don't think it's the best thing to do for your mobility for CrossFit. I don't think it's getting you to actually move through things. The tension that you're going through those types of stretches in versus the actual movements and the tension you're going through in CrossFit is very different. But I think moving more is something which is very underrated. If you have mobility issues and you're not getting 10,000 steps a day, make an effort to do it. Like literally get yourself walking more, because going through locomotion, that just your normal gait cycle of putting your right foot in front and your left hand arm sort of naturally swinging in front and doing that sort of alternation movement can be really good for people's mobility. And then also just trying to move differently as well. So exposing yourself to different types of movement. And I think one of the things we find in CrossFit is people just go through the same movement patterns. And people, if they have poor shoulder mobility, they will spend all of their time on a foam roller trying to force themselves into more thoracic extension. And I've done this. You're like, I'm lacking thoracic extension, so I need to do it more. And your training takes you into that position all the time. So what might be better is doing a Jefferson curl and actually going into flexion and just getting some more movement the other way. You know, think of it like this. If the door is always open and you're trying to open it even more and it's stuck, maybe close it a little bit and then you can open it a bit more, right? You want to have a bit more motion and more movement options, and that's going to be the thing, I think, which will get people moving better, helping their shoulder mobility, helping their hip mobility. And if you don't have a setup where you can get out and you can move more often, like try to in some way try to have that in your life. An easy one is just getting a dog. Get a dog to improve your mobility, but you will have to walk. But you know, doing something simple like walking to work or commuting actively in some way or something along those lines can be helpful. And then just maybe play some different sports, try out some new things instead of doing active recovery in the gym and just sitting on your ass doing single unders, rowing, box step ups. Like go out and just, I don't know, play a bit of badminton, shoot some hoops, do something like that. You know, don't do anything overly strenuous, but moving differently, I think, is going to be a big one.
Yeah, I agree. I think I agree with everything that you said there. I think it's too easy to get stuck into, whether it's through work or through training, to get stuck into the same movement patterns all the time. I think the more variety you can have, the more you can move, the better. And I also think, like you say, the bad postures are the ones that you can't get out of. Because equally, people might think typically, bad posture's been sat at a desk like this. I'm
purposely going to slouch for the rest of this podcast for those people who are watching on YouTube. Just to...
But I also think you can get people and they walk around and they're constantly in extension.
That's more common.
And that can be equally as bad.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's no good or bad. It's only bad when you're stuck. So don't get stuck.
All right, final question.
Is the unknown part of CrossFit becoming a hindrance to less elite athletes' progression?
Okay. What do you reckon, Sam?
I mean, part of it's the sport, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like, the unknown element is partly what makes CrossFit what it is. And I think if you compare that to High Rocks, where everybody knows what it is and it's not going to change, it's completely different. You know, I think the variance means that there's always a lot to work on. And I think when you're less elite, when you look at the elite guys, right, and they can do all the skills that most people would think of, when all of a sudden something new comes out of the woodwork, so like say pirouettes, because they've got so many skills already, they can afford to spend a lot of time working on that skill and pick it up relatively quick. Whereas if you're a less elite athlete and you can't do your handstand walks, never mind your pirouettes, and you can't do your muscle ups, and you can't do your, maybe even like your butterfly chest bar, you spend so much time working on those skills that then obviously having the time to prepare for something completely unknown is difficult, and that is a hindrance. If you're trying to compare it to an elite athlete, then you also have to think, well, if they're competing at a level that's relative to them, then you know equally those kind of things aren't going to be there. And I think it's only a hindrance if you're very scattergun with your approach to how you develop these things. Because I think if you're quite methodical with thinking, all right, I might do a comp and there might be something in there that's completely random, never done it before. But if you've got generally a good grasp of the basics, you can pick that thing up quite quick, even on the day. You know, like let's just say it's, I don't know, like something with a D-ball. If you're someone who has a very good foundation of strength, then with a few last-minute technical things, you can generally pick up something like that. So I think that's where, as a beginner athlete, getting all the basics completely like nailed before you start to focus on the more complex thing is the best way to go to try and make that less of a hindrance.
Yeah, I think the sort of balance you're trying to get in this phase is getting enough exposure to the skills, develop your skill base as quickly as you can, get exposed to the different situations, learn the sport, enjoy the sport, you know, learn just to enjoy the chaotic nature of it. I think you need to balance that with using more structured training, which has a high transfer over into other things. And I think that developing that base is going to be a really important thing. And I think that if we think about our training when we sort of started out, a lot of it was just trying to figure things out so you could just do the new skill that came up. And it could be, all right, we've just seen all of these CrossFit YouTube workouts, people doing butterfly pull-ups, let's figure out how to do that. I remember when bar muscle-ups weren't a thing, and then they became a thing. And then we had to hammer those until they became a thing. But the training base that we came in with was, you know, doing weight training for a while and playing sport and doing a bit of strength and conditioning and having some development of these movement patterns which have a high transfer over. You know, it's okay, we need to get someone strong. Back squat's pretty good to do that. So let's try and develop that. If we need to develop someone's weightlifting, okay, we're going to use sensible variations. We're going to be doing drop snatches to get faster under the bar, and we're just going to be working hang variations so we can just develop that confidence going through the full movement. It doesn't have to be complexes. It doesn't have to be, you know, no feet variations. If we're thinking about how to develop our gymnastics, building up a real good base of strength in the upper body, being able to hold a handstand for a while against, you know, wall-facing handstand for a while, keep your good body lines and that type of thing. I think that's really important. You know, I put up a post the other day which was just talking about training ideas which some people take a little bit too far. And I think one of them is this idea of like doing strict, and you have to have X amount of strict reps before you do kipping reps. And we're usually told that that's for like a safety thing. And
yeah, that was a big thing at one point.
Yeah, it was. And I think that, you know, there's some validity to it. But I think, honestly, the better thing for having strict reps before kipping reps is you're just able to practice more and you're able to get the skill quicker. Your ability to hang from the bar, because you can do 3 strict pull-ups, is a lot more than if you have half a strict pull-up. So the amount of time that you end up spending doing kipping practice it increases, and then you get the skill quicker. I don't necessarily think it's as much about, you know, not having the strength in your rotator cuff to go through this movement pattern. It's just makes sense. It's an order of things. You know, don't skip steps and make the next logical step in your training. And I think that you've got to really try to balance this structure in your training with this ability to explore and find a bit of your way in the sport as well. Because I think you want to have a nice broad base, but you also want to find the thing that you enjoy and that you're good at, because sometimes that's the thing that will keep you coming in for more. If you know that you're able to kick someone's ass on this type of workout or whatever the situation is, those types of things can be okay to lean into. You don't want to take it too far, but you want to make sure that people are trying to find their strengths as well as working on their weaknesses. So it can be difficult, but I definitely think that if you have a solid strength program and you keep it somewhat consistent, and then the variance does come from the skill work, it comes from the warm-ups, it comes from maybe a bit of play and practice that you do after the session, it comes from the conditioning pieces that you do, but also not making changes which are too big. Okay, we're going to be doing a conditioning piece on Mondays. It's 10 minutes long. It's going to be assault bike plus a dumbbell movement. Okay, so cycle through 6 different variations of a dumbbell clean and jerk, dumbbell snatch, do a hang split snatch, whatever it is. Just start getting experience doing these things, because you might be fumbling around for a workout, but you'll go back to the simple stuff and you'll feel better for it. And I think that, there's definitely a balance there, but it can be really tough, because you do need to also go through competitions and just come across situations where you have to figure it out, and you find those people who are good competitors and have a lot of competitive experience. They figure it out, and you have a lot of people who they're like, usually those people who find it really difficult, they haven't played sport before, they've not really sort of been dealt those types of situations. So that problem solving.
How much of that do you think is experience as a competitor versus just general athleticism?
No, I would say there's a bit of both. I think on a lower level it's athleticism, and then on a higher level I think it's experience as a competitor, because you do have people, for example, in the CrossFit world who they're athletic in different ways, but it's not like in a skillful way. I mean, you see some crossover single unders from a couple of years ago. You've seen some of them try to throw a softball in 2011. I'm not saying that those were some unathletic moments, let's call it that.
100%.
Yeah.
And that's the uniqueness, I think, of CrossFit is, I don't know, you can almost out-train athleticism much more than in other sports, I think.
Completely.
I think, like for us, obviously coming from a rugby background, there's certain things in rugby that are untrainable in some ways, and you see it in people who you would look at them you'd see them in a CrossFit gym, and you think they'd make a hell of a rugby player, but you put them on a rugby pitch and they just can't pick things up.
Yeah.
Whereas I think within CrossFit, you can out-train that with enough hard work and smart training.
Yeah, for sure. There's definitely we should do one of our podcasts in the future on, because I know both of us have tried to sort of pick up sports and do different things as we sort of transitioned out of doing CrossFit, and then there's definitely been a lot of learning and unlearning that I've gone through with that. But
we're basically just working our way towards playing golf.
No, I'm not too sure, man. I've got to have some contact involved in there somehow.
Mate, I miss the contact so much.
Are you doing jiu-jitsu?
I was watching.
Are you going to get back? Are you going to get back into it?
Yeah, I'd like to. Everyone. The big thing now is paddle. Hey.
Yeah,
You've probably been around it for ages in Barcelona, but over here it's booming at the moment. And I've played it once or twice, and it's fun, but it's nothing like rugby or even jiu-jitsu. It's the contact that it's just an outlet, isn't it?
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's like there's something, probably some issues with masculinity or something like that going on.
Oh, it's a caveman thing, isn't it? Like, there's just something about. Even the thing I don't. It is a caveman thing, but even with rugby, you can be the one getting smashed and it still feels good. You don't have to be the one doing the smashing.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Whereas jiu-jitsu, when you're in a a headlock in jiu-jitsu. That doesn't feel good regardless of which way you look at it.
Getting smothered by some guys like 100 kilos.
Yeah, and you're sweaty, and it's different, mate. It's different. Rugby's just unique.
Yeah,
I think the rugby as well, it's like, all right, you might have got smashed, but you got smashed for your team.
yeah, the team thing is huge. I think there's definitely a...
Like if your 10 gives you a hospital pass, but you take it in anyway, then fair play. Shout out to Sam Allen.
All right. Okay, so we're going to wrap it up there. Team, if you have not subscribed on all of the things, the Spotify, the Apple Podcasts, YouTube, then make sure you do that. Give us a 5-star review and send this to your mates, whether they're your training partners, your coaching partners. And next week, I think we'll be able to get these out on a weekly basis. Next week, we'll be back for another episode of the Barbell Strategy Podcast.